My name is Callie. I'm 28, and I finally learned that family betrayal doesn't always come as a scream. Sometimes it's a cold, calculated whisper. While my twin sister, Meredith, was popping champagne in her new $750,000 luxury downtown loft, a gift from our parents, I was standing in front of a literal ruin. My father, Arthur, handed me the keys to a rotting 1920s farmhouse 3 hours from civilization, acting like he'd handed me the keys to a kingdom. I looked at the moldy walls and the caving roof, feeling utterly humiliated and shamed by the blatant favoritism. It was the ultimate backstabbed moment, a visual representation of my self-worth in their eyes. Meredith got the gold, and I got the garbage. My mother, Sylvia, didn't even look at me. She just kept scrolling through furniture catalogs for Meredith's perfect space while I stood there in the dust. I couldn't believe they were calling this an inheritance, especially since they knew I was struggling to keep my small furniture restoration business afloat. The infidelity of their love was clear. They'd cheated me out of a future to inflate Meredith's ego. Standing there, I felt the weight of years of being the invisible twin, always the one who worked while Meredith played the victim. This family drama was reaching its peak, and I could see the smirk on Meredith's face as she adjusted her designer sunglasses, mocking my new project. It was a classic case of betrayal, orchestrated by the very people who were supposed to protect my dignity. But as I touched the peeling wallpaper, something inside me shifted from pure heartbreak to a cold, simmering fire. I realized that this gift was meant to keep me busy, broke, and out of sight while they lived their high society life in the city. They thought they had finally put me in my place, a shocking move even for a man as controlling as Arthur. He told me I should be grateful for the opportunity to build something, even as the floorboards groaned under my feet like a warning. The lied-to version of Callie would have cried, but I just gripped those rusty keys until my knuckles turned white. I knew that if I wanted justice, I couldn't wait for them to give it to me. I'd have to build it from the ground up, literally. Reclaiming my life started right there in that wreckage, away from their judging eyes and Meredith's fake, high-pitched sympathy. I started imagining the possibilities, not of a home, but of a fortress where their influence could never reach me again. It was going to be my own version of payback, though I didn't know yet just how sweet that victory would eventually taste. As I walked through the debris, I found an old, heavy toolbox in the corner, covered in decades of grime and forgotten promises. It felt like a sign, a physical manifestation of the grit I'd need to survive this latest round of family betrayal. I didn't say a word to Arthur as he drove away in his pristine SUV, leaving me alone in the silence of the countryside. Little did he know, I wasn't just planning to fix a roof. I was documenting every single move for the storm I was about to stir. I spent the next 8 months living out of a sleeping bag, pouring exactly $14,500, every cent I had, and 450 hours of pure agony into that ruin. Every morning at 5 a.m., I was hammering, sanding, and plumbing, driven by a desperate need for reclaiming the person they tried to bury. I wasn't just building a house. I was rebuilding my self-worth with every joist I replaced and every wall I painted. I kept every single receipt and permit meticulously filed, knowing Arthur's habit of forgetting verbal agreements when it suited him. The family drama didn't stop just because I was miles away. Meredith would call just to brag about her marble countertops while I was scrubbing soot. She mocked my efforts, calling the house a charity case and laughing about the peasant work I was doing with my own 2 hands. I took it all in silence, letting her think I was the same weak girl she'd always backstabbed for fun. Every insult only fueled my vengeance, making me work harder until my hands bled and my back felt like it would snap. Arthur would visit occasionally, not to help, but to exert cold control, checking the progress like a landlord rather than a father. He'd point out flaws with a sneer, never acknowledging the $14,500 of my own money disappearing into his gift. It was a masterclass in betrayal. He wanted the property improved, but he never intended for me to feel like I actually owned it. I saw the way he looked at the new hardwood floors, There was a greed in his eyes that made my skin crawl. Despite the exhaustion, the house began to transform into something breathtaking, a masterpiece of craftsmanship that reflected my true dignity. People from the nearby town started stopping by, amazed at the miracle I was performing on a property they thought was a lost cause. I was finally finding my voice in the quiet, away from the infidelity of my family's conditional love and their constant lies. I was documenting everything, not just for the memories, but as a shield against the karma I knew was coming for them. I didn't mind the invisible twin label anymore because it gave me the cover I needed to work my payback in the dark. While they were busy maintaining their shallow image in the city, I was creating something tangible, something real, and something completely mine. My justice was being carved into the very bones of that farmhouse, and the more beautiful it became, the more I realized they'd want it. I could feel the trap being set, but this time, I was the one holding the map to the exit. One evening, as the sun set over the newly finished porch, I realized the house was worth triple what I'd put into it. The truth was, I had turned a liability into a gold mine, and I knew my family's generosity was about to reach its expiration date. I sat there in the silence, nursing my calloused hands, waiting for the phone call I knew was coming from the city. I was ready for the shocking revelation they were about to drop, because for the first time in my life, I had the receipts to fight back. During my rare trips to the city to pick up specialized supplies, I started noticing cracks in Meredith's perfect life that she couldn't hide. Her luxury apartment building was littered with missed delivery notices, and I overheard her hushed, frantic phone calls about minimum payments and temporary freezes. It was clear the golden child was drowning in a sea of debt, her lifestyle maintained by a house of cards. The lied-to parents had no idea their favorite daughter was a financial wreck, or perhaps they were just choosing to stay blind. Meredith's behavior became increasingly erratic, her usual arrogance replaced by a sharp, desperate edge whenever the topic of money came up. She was constantly forgetting her wallet at lunch, leaving me, the one they called poor, to pick up the tab for her $20 salads. I saw the betrayal in her eyes every time she looked at my rugged, reliable truck, realizing her leased sports car was days away from repossession. The infidelity to her own image was exhausting to watch, a pathetic display of a life built on nothing but vanity. I started seeing strange men in suits hanging around her lobby, and the whispers about credit cards became impossible for even my parents to ignore. Yet, Sylvia and Arthur continued to enable her, feeding the family drama by pouring more resources into her bottomless pit of a life. It was a shocking lack of accountability that made my blood boil, especially since her $750,000 loft was actually built on leveraged loans. My self-worth was grounded in reality, while Meredith was floating in a fantasy that was about to hit the ground hard. I realized then that the luxury apartment wasn't a gift of love, but a bribe to keep Meredith looking like the success they demanded her to be. The backstabbed feeling I had when she got the loft started to fade, replaced by a strange sense of pity and a lot of suspicion. I knew that when her walls finally tumbled down, my parents would look for a new, perfect place for her to hide. My renovated farmhouse was looking more like a target every day, a safety net for the daughter who never worked a day in her life. One afternoon, I caught Arthur and Sylvia whispering in the kitchen, their faces pale as they looked over a stack of Meredith's bank statements. They didn't see me, but I heard the word eviction and the panic in my mother's voice as she talked about the family name. They were desperate for a solution, and I knew my hard work was the only currency they had left to save their golden child. The vengeance I felt wasn't just for me, it was for the truth they were so determined to bury under my floorboards. I left the city that day with a heavy pit in my stomach, knowing the peace I'd built in the countryside was about to be invaded. I could see the karma circling Meredith, but I also knew my parents would try to make me pay for her mistakes. The family betrayal was entering a new, more dangerous phase, and I needed to be 3 steps ahead of their desperation. I reached out to an old contact, someone who knew the history of our family's assets better than Arthur ever did. The hammer dropped exactly 48 hours after my last visit to the city. just as I was putting the finishing touches on the master suite. Arthur didn't call. He showed up at my door with Sylvia, his face set in that business-first coldness that used to make me tremble. Without a single word of praise for the miracle I'd performed on the house, he dropped a bombshell that left me feeling humiliated. "Callie, we've decided Meredith needs this place more than you do. You have 48 hours to pack your things and leave." I couldn't believe the words coming out of his mouth, the sheer audacity of demanding I hand over 450 hours of my life. He claimed the property was his land, and that as the owner, he had every right to decide who lived there. It was the ultimate backstabbed move, a calculated theft of my labor, my money, and my newly found self-worth. Sylvia just stood there, clutching her designer bag, acting like I was a squatter in my own home, a disappointment who didn't understand family loyalty. They didn't care about the $1,400 I'd spent or the blood I'd left on those floorboards. All they cared about was saving Meredith from her own debt. This was family betrayal in its purest, most toxic form, a sacrifice of the invisible daughter to protect the golden one. I felt a wave of vengeance wash over me, but I kept my face mask-like, refusing to give them the satisfaction of seeing me break. I told them I needed time to process, and they gave me that smirk, thinking they'd already won the war. The deadline was a ticking time bomb, a 48-hour window where they expected me to just roll over and die like I used to. But I wasn't that girl anymore. I was the woman who had rebuilt a ruin with her own hands, and I knew how to find the structural weaknesses. My justice wasn't going to come from begging for mercy from people who had none to give. I waited until their SUV disappeared down the dirt road before I picked up my phone, my hand shaking not with fear, but with rage. I called Marcus, a real estate attorney I'd known since college, and told him everything: the gift, the renovation, and the sudden eviction. I told him about the $1,400 and the 450 hours of labor, and I could hear the gears turning on the other end of the line. "Callie," he said, his voice grave, "nobody builds on land they don't own without a contract, but your father might have made a massive mistake. We had 48 hours to find the truth, and I was going to use every single second to dismantle Arthur's empire." That night, I didn't sleep. I paced the halls of the house I'd breathed life back into, feeling the ghost of my Grandma Lorraine in the wood. She was the only one who ever truly saw me, the only one who didn't play favorites in this twisted family drama. I remembered the way she used to look at Arthur, with a mixture of disappointment and a secret knowledge she never shared. I had a feeling the shocking reality was hidden in the county records, and Marcus was the only one with the key to unlock it. Marcus called me back at 3 a.m., his voice crackling with a mixture of excitement and disbelief that made my heart race. "Callie, you're not going to believe this, but Arthur doesn't own a single blade of grass on that property," he whispered. He'd spent the night pulling county parcel records, probate filings, and archived trust deeds from Grandma Lorraine back in 2012. The truth was more powerful than I ever imagined. The land was never my father's to give or take away. The trust was specific, naming me, the invisible granddaughter, as the sole beneficiary of the house and the surrounding 20 acres. Lorraine had seen the betrayal coming a decade ago and had quietly ensured my self-worth would be protected from Arthur's greed. I couldn't believe she had loved me that much, that she had reached out from the grave to hand me the ultimate weapon. This wasn't just luck. It was karma finally coming home to roost in the most spectacular way possible. Marcus explained that Arthur had been acting as a trustee in name only, but he had no legal authority to transfer the title to anyone but me. He had lied to the entire family for years, pretending he owned the estate to maintain his image of the powerful patriarch. This was the justice I had prayed for, a legal ironclad shield that would turn his 48-hour deadline into his own funeral. I felt a surge of dignity I hadn't felt in years, knowing I was finally the one in control. We planned the payback with surgical precision, deciding not to reveal the trust until the most public, most humiliating moment possible. I wanted Arthur and Sylvia to feel the same shamed and humiliated sting they had tried to inflict on me for 28 years. Marcus promised to bring the original deed and the trust documents, along with a few surprises he'd found regarding Arthur's management of the estate. The family betrayal was about to be exposed to the light, and I was going to be the one holding the torch. I spent the next day acting like the defeated daughter, letting Sylvia see me packing boxes while she walked through the house planning Meredith's move-in. She was already talking about tearing out the built-in bookshelves I'd spent 60 hours crafting, her infidelity to my hard work making me grit my teeth. I let her gloat, let her think she'd finally crushed my spirit, all while the trust deed sat safely in Marcus's briefcase. It was the hardest acting job of my life, but the vengeance was going to be worth every second of silence. By the time the sun went down on the eve of the housewarming, I was ready for the final act of this family drama. I looked at the house one last time as a guest and realized it had always been mine, even when I didn't know it. The shocking part wasn't that my father was a thief, but that I had finally found the strength to stop him. Tomorrow, the world would see the truth, and I would finally be reclaiming the legacy that was always meant for me. The day of the housewarming arrived, and Sylvia had transformed my quiet sanctuary into a stage for her latest social theater. She'd invited 20 of our most influential family friends, all under the pretense of celebrating Meredith's brave new start in the countryside. I stood in the corner, watching them sip expensive wine on the porch I'd built, listening to Sylvia tell everyone I'd happily agreed to hand it over. It was a blatant, disgusting family betrayal played out in front of a live audience, turning me into the villain. The guests looked at me with a mix of pity and judgment, clearly believing the lied version of the story where I was the unstable twin who couldn't handle the responsibility. Meredith was already holding court, acting like she'd been the one to pick out the finishes and design the open floor plan. I felt a wave of shamed heat crawl up my neck, but I held my ground, knowing the truth was about to crash their party. This was the peak of their family drama, a performance built on the back of my $1,495 and 450 hours of labor. Arthur was in his element, playing the role of the generous provider to perfection, accepting toasts for his supposed kindness to both his daughters. He didn't even acknowledge me, treating me like a ghost haunting the beautiful home I'd created for his favorite. The betrayal was so thick I could almost taste it, a bitter reminder of why I'd stayed invisible for so long. But I kept my eyes on the driveway, waiting for the one car that would turn this celebration into a crime scene. I saw the way some of the older relatives whispered, looking at the quality of the wood and the precision of the work with skeptical eyes. They knew Meredith didn't have a craft-oriented bone in her body, yet no one dared to challenge Arthur's narrative of his golden child's success. My self-worth was being shredded in public for the sake of a lie, but I didn't flinch, even when Meredith mocked my outfit in front of her friends. I was just the help who had overstayed her welcome, a footnote in their grand story of luxury and control. As Sylvia called everyone together for a special announcement, the air felt heavy with the impending shocking reveal I had prepared. She began a speech about family unity and how some children are just born to lead, a direct jab at my supposedly secondary status. I could see the pride in Arthur's eyes, a man who thought he had successfully stolen a legacy and a house without firing a single shot. Little did he know, he'd just invited 20 witnesses to his own legal and social execution. The tension was a physical thing. A wire pulled so tight it was vibrating, and I felt a strange sense of calm wash over me. I wasn't the invisible twin anymore. I was the owner of the room, the land, and the future they were trying to steal. When the sound of a luxury sedan pulling up broke Sylvia's speech, I knew Marcus had arrived with the documents that would end the lie. The justice I'd waited a lifetime for was finally here, and it was wearing a suit and carrying a blue folder. The party shifted toward the grand foyer as Meredith stepped up to officially accept the keys from Arthur, her face glowing with unearned triumph. She stood under a "Welcome Home Meredith" banner that felt like a slap in the face, especially since she'd never even seen the property before today. She started belittling my work, calling the kitchen a bit rustic for her taste, but saying she'd make do with the little project I'd started. I stood there, a silent witness to the infidelity of her gratitude and the depth of her entitlement. Arthur's chest puffed out as he handed her a set of keys he'd had made without my permission, using the locks I'd paid for. The crowd cheered, and I saw the way my mother looked at Meredith with a worshipful gaze that I had never, once, received in 28 years. It was a masterclass in backstabbed reality, a public coronation of a thief in the house of the person she'd robbed. This was the ultimate humiliated moment, designed to break my spirit in front of everyone who mattered to our family. I watched as Meredith began to talk about her vision for the property, describing renovations that would cost more than my entire life savings. The guests, blissfully unaware of her $62,000 debt, nodded along as if she were a financial genius instead of a sinking ship. My dignity was being used as a rug for her to walk on, and for a second, I felt the old urge to just run and hide. But then I looked at the floorboards I'd sanded until my fingers were raw, and the fire of vengeance returned tenfold. The sheer audacity of their performance was shocking, even for people I'd known my entire life to be manipulative and cold. They were so convinced of their own power that they didn't even notice me moving toward the center of the room, my phone in hand. I caught the eye of Aunt Martha, the one person who always suspected Arthur was a fraud, and she gave me a look of deep concern. The family drama was reaching its boiling point, and the steam was about to scald everyone in the room. Suddenly, the front door opened, and the room fell silent as Marcus walked in, followed by a woman whose presence made Arthur's face go gray. It was Grandma Lorraine's lifelong best friend and legal executor, a woman who knew every secret the Holloway family had ever tried to bury. She wasn't there for the cake or the champagne. She was there to deliver a dose of karma that would leave them breathless. I could see the confusion on Sylvia's face, a flicker of fear that the truth was no longer under her control. Meredith tried to maintain her hostess persona, asking who the uninvited guests were with a sharp, defensive edge in her voice. But Marcus didn't even look at her. He walked straight to the center of the room and opened his blue folder with a snap that sounded like a gunshot. "I believe there's been a misunderstanding about who actually owns this property," he said, his voice carrying to every corner of the house. The betrayal was about to be turned inside out, and I was finally ready to take my seat at the head of the table. Marcus didn't waste time with pleasantries. He held up the 2012 trust deed and began reading the terms with a cold, clinical precision that froze the room. As the words "sole beneficiary, Callie Holloway" echoed through the foyer, I watched the color drain from Arthur's face until he looked like a ghost. The truth was out. He had no title, no authority, and absolutely no claim to the land he'd just gifted to his favorite daughter. The shocking silence that followed was the most beautiful sound I had ever heard in my entire life. The guests began to murmur, their eyes darting from the legal documents to the man they had just been toasting as a paragon of generosity. Arthur tried to bluster, claiming the documents were outdated or a mistake, but the legal executor stepped forward to shut him down. She confirmed that Grandma Lorraine had specifically structured the trust to bypass Arthur, knowing he would try to backstab me for Meredith's sake. It was a public, humiliated moment that stripped him of his family man mask in less than 60 seconds of reading. Sylvia looked like she was going to faint, her hand gripping the back of a chair as the realization hit that their golden child's safety net had just evaporated. The family betrayal was no longer a private secret. It was a public scandal being witnessed by 20 of their closest peers. I felt a surge of justice so powerful it was almost dizzying, watching the people who had shamed me now drown in their own shame. This was the payback I had earned with every drop of sweat and every dollar of my $1,425 investment. Meredith's face twisted from triumph to a mask of pure, ugly rage as she realized the luxury she'd been promised was a total illusion. She turned on Arthur, her voice cracking as she demanded to know why he lied about owning the property. The infidelity of their alliance was crumbling right there in front of everyone, proving that their loyalty was only as deep as their greed. I stood tall, reclaiming my space and my voice, as Marcus handed me the official keys to the house I already knew by heart. The room erupted into whispers as people realized they had been invited to witness a theft, not a housewarming, and the judgment shifted entirely toward my parents. The karma was swift and brutal. Arthur's reputation, the thing he valued above all else, was disintegrating in real time. I looked at him and saw a small, broken man who had tried to build his kingdom on a foundation of lies and favoritism. My self-worth was no longer tied to his approval, and for the first time, I felt truly, completely free from his control. Marcus then dropped the final legal hammer, informing Arthur that he would be held liable for any damages or attempts to contest the trust. The invisible twin was now the legal owner of the Holloway legacy, and there wasn't a single thing Arthur could do to stop it. I watched as the guests began to shuffle toward the door, too uncomfortable to stay and witness the final collapse of the family's prestige. The vengeance was complete, but the most shocking revelation of the night was still hiding in Meredith's desperate eyes. With the guests fleeing the scene, the air in the house turned toxic as Meredith finally reached her breaking point under the weight of the legal reveal. She collapsed onto the sofa I'd upholstered, her facade of luxury shattering into a million jagged pieces as she began to sob. "I have nowhere else to go, Dad!" she screamed, her voice echoing through the empty hallways I'd worked so hard to silence. The truth finally came spilling out. She hadn't just moved from the apartment. She had been evicted and was $62,000 in debt. Arthur and Sylvia looked at her in horror, the shocking reality of their perfect daughter's failure finally piercing their bubble of denial. She admitted to maxing out 12 credit cards, hiding the notices for months, and even forged Arthur's signature on a loan she couldn't pay back. This was the family betrayal they hadn't seen coming, the betrayal from the child they had poured everything into while leaving me with nothing. The infidelity of her lifestyle was laid bare, a pathetic record of vanity and financial suicide that made my $1,400 investment look like a fortune. Sylvia tried to defend her, claiming it was just a mistake, but the numbers didn't lie. Meredith had spent $62,000 on clothes, trips, and a life she couldn't afford. The family drama had shifted from my gift to her catastrophe, and I watched as Arthur's face turned from gray to a deep, humiliated purple. He realized that in trying to save her with my house, he had only delayed the inevitable collapse of his favorite's reputation. The karma of his favoritism was that he was now tied to a daughter who had drained him dry. I stood there, feeling a strange lack of satisfaction in her pain, only a deep sense of relief that I was no longer part of their cycle. Meredith's self-worth was entirely tied to the things she bought, while mine was built on the things I had created with my own hands. She looked at me with a mixture of hatred and envy, realizing that the invisible twin was the only one with a roof over her head. The justice of the situation was almost too perfect. She had mocked my work, and now that work was the only thing she craved. Arthur turned to me, his voice trembling as he tried one last time to appeal to my family loyalty, to let Meredith stay in the guest room. I looked him dead in the eye, feeling my dignity like a shield, and simply said, "No." The backstabbed girl was gone. In her place was a woman who knew that family didn't mean being a doormat for someone else's destruction. I wasn't going to let her debt and her chaos poison the sanctuary I'd built with my own blood and tears. The shamed silence that followed my refusal was the final nail in the coffin of our old family dynamic, a clear boundary they never thought I'd draw. Meredith's screams turned to whimpers as Sylvia realized they would have to find another way to pay off the $62,000 without my help. I realized then that they had never loved the real Meredith, or the real me. They only loved the versions of us that made them look good. Now the truth was all they had left, and it was a very cold, very expensive reality to wake up to. The morning after the collapse, I didn't wait for them to come back. I had a locksmith at the house by 7 a.m. to change every single entry point. I issued a formal cease and desist through Marcus, making it legally clear that any further attempt to enter my property would result in immediate arrest. Reclaiming my peace meant cutting the cord entirely, ensuring the family betrayal could never reach across my threshold again. My self-worth demanded a fortress, and I was finally in a position to build the walls as high as I needed. While clearing out the last of the housewarming debris, I found a loose floorboard in the back of Grandma Lorraine's old bedroom that I'd missed. Inside was a small tin box containing a series of letters addressed to me. Letters that had been sent to my parents' house years ago but never delivered. The shocking evidence of Arthur's control was right there. He had hidden multiple attempts by Lorraine to reach out to me before she died. He had lied to her, telling her I was too busy or uninterested, all to keep her legacy away from the invisible child. One letter contained a small hand-knitted bracelet and a note that said, "Callie, your hands were made to build, not to hold on to people who don't see you." I couldn't believe the depth of the betrayal. Arthur hadn't just tried to steal the land. He had tried to steal my relationship with the only person who loved me. This was the ultimate infidelity to the concept of fatherhood, a cruel manipulation that had left me feeling alone for over a decade. The justice I felt now was tinged with a deep, mournful sadness for the time I'd lost with her. I sat on the floor and cried for the first time in months, not out of weakness, but out of the sheer weight of the truth finally being known. My dignity was restored not by the house or the land, but by the knowledge that I was always worthy of Lorraine's love and belief. The vengeance I'd sought felt small compared to the peace of knowing I wasn't the problem child they had made me out to be. I was the keeper of her legacy, and I was going to honor it by living a life they could never touch again. I spent the rest of the day installing security cameras and reinforcing the boundaries of my 20 acres, making sure the family drama stayed on the other side of the fence. I felt a sense of power in every bolt I tightened, a physical manifestation of the word no that I had finally learned to say. The karma was that while I was finding hidden treasures of love, Arthur and Sylvia were likely drowning in the mess of Meredith's $62,000 debt. I was finally moving forward, leaving the ghosts of their expectations in the dust where they belonged. As night fell, I sat on my porch and looked out over the land that was finally, legally, and spiritually mine. The house wasn't just a project anymore. It was a testament to my survival and a monument to the woman who had seen my potential from the start. The betrayal had been the catalyst, but my own hands had been the cure for everything they tried to break. I was no longer the invisible twin. I was the architect of my own destiny, and the locks were staying shut for good. The weeks following the ambush were surprisingly quiet, as the social circles Arthur once commanded began to pull away from him like he was radioactive. Word of the shocking legal reveal and the $62,000 debt scandal had spread through our community like wildfire, turning his perfect family image into a joke. The family drama he'd tried so hard to control was now a public cautionary tale about greed and favoritism. He tried to save face by telling people Grandma Lorraine was confused when she wrote the trust. But no one was buying his lied-to narrative anymore. I watched from a distance as their respect in the town evaporated, their invitations to high society events drying up as the truth of their behavior became common knowledge. Meredith vanished from the family group chats for weeks, presumably hiding from creditors, while Sylvia and Arthur were left holding the ruins of their reputation. Relatives who had once ignored me started sending tentative messages, trying to distance themselves from Arthur's betrayal and align with the new owner. I ignored them all, focusing on the garden I was planting and the peace I had earned with my own sweat. My justice was the quiet life I now led, a life where every sunrise felt like a victory over the darkness they tried to impose on me. Reclaiming my identity was the hardest job I ever took on, but it was also the most rewarding. The farmhouse was finally a home, and the invisible twin was finally seen, most importantly, by herself.